Hey class, I'm so excited to see you back. So let's get right to it. The face of multiculturalism in America today is quite different than it was in the past, largely because of relatively high birth rate among some minority populations and the huge but relatively recent immigration of Spanish-speaking people from Mexico, Cuba, Central America, and South America. Part of that influx consists of substantial numbers of undocumented immigrants who have entered the country illegally and who, because of experiences in their home countries, may have a special fear of police authority and a general distrust of the law. Such features make members of this group hesitant to report being victimized, and their undocumented status makes them easy prey for illegal scams involving extortion, blackmail, and documentation crimes. It is sufficient to recognize that the diverse values, perspectives, and behaviors characteristic of various groups within society have a significant impact on the justice system. Is there a big issue with prejudice and discrimination in America? What about our criminal justice system? I want to know your thoughts, so drop the comments below, guys, or post your comments on Class Dojo and I will go ahead and look at them. But today we are going to watch a few minutes of this video. But if you become super interested in this topic, don't hesitate to continue watching on your own. Alright, let's get started. Okay class, let's get it started.
February 1999, 4 New York City police officers were on patrol in the Bronx when they saw a young black man standing on a stoop. They thought he looked suspicious. When they pulled over, he retreated into the doorway and began digging in his pocket. He kept digging as the police shouted at him to show his hands. A few seconds later, the man, Amadou Diallo, a 23-year-old immigrant from Guinea, was dead, hit by 19 of the 41 bullets that the police fired at him. What Diallo was reaching for was his wallet. He was going for his ID as he stood on the steps of his own apartment building. Diallo's story and the officer's fatal prejudgment of him is recounted in Malcolm Gladwell's 2005 bestseller, Blink. Gladwell and the social psychologist whose work he draws upon explores Diallo's case as an example of that gray area between deliberate violence and an accident, propagated by non-conscious or implicit biases. The officers did discriminate against Diallo, but the prejudice they acted on may have been driven by something more subtle than simple hatred. And that's an important thing to think about. Yes, there are lots of overtly bigoted people and policies at work all over the world, but what we're interested in today is the more insidious, non-conscious, automatic bias and how it can affect our behavior. The fact is, our implicit biases affect the way we relate to others in a very real way. Our race, gender, age, religion, or sexual orientation can make the difference between whether we get a job or not, a fair paycheck or a good rental, or whether we get randomly pulled over or shot and killed for reaching for a wallet. In the last two episodes, we've examined how we think about and how we influence one another, but social psychology is also about how we relate to one another. Like what factors might cause us to help another person, or harm them, or fear them? What are the social and cognitive and emotional roots of prejudice, racism, and sexism, and how do they shape our society?
So what do you guys think? What are the social, cognitive, and emotional roots of prejudice, racism, and sexism, and how do they shape our society? That's another question that I want you to try and answer, and you can drop those comments in below the YouTube video or on Class Dojo, your choice. But let's continue.
These are some of the aspects of ourselves that are the hardest and most uncomfortable for us to explore, which is why they're so important to understand. We've all been unfairly judged in our time, and let's not pretend that we haven't done our fair share of uninformed judging too. Like it or not, prejudice is a common human condition. Prejudice just means prejudgment. It's an unjustified, typically negative attitude toward an individual or group. Prejudicial attitudes are often directed along the lines of gender, ethnic, socioeconomic status, or culture. And by definition, prejudice is not the same thing as stereotyping or discrimination, although the three phenomena are intimately related. People may distrust a female mechanic. That's a prejudicial attitude, but it's rooted in a stereotype or overgeneralized belief about a particular group. Although it's often discussed in a negative way, stereotyping is really more of a general cognitive process that doesn't have to be negative. It can even be accurate at times. Like, I have the stereotype that all crows have wings. injuries and birth defects aside, and that happens to be true. But on the negative end, your prejudice against female mechanics may be rooted in some inaccurate stereotype about women's skills with a socket wrench. And when stereotypical beliefs combine with prejudicial attitudes and emotions, like fear and hostility, they can drive the behavior we call discrimination. So a prejudiced person won't necessarily act on their attitude. Say you believe in the stereotype that overweight people are lazy. You might then feel a prejudiced distaste when you see someone who appears overweight. But if you act on your prejudice and say refuse to hire them for a job or don't let them sit at your lunch counter, then you've crossed over into discriminating against them. The former apartheid system of racial segregation in South Africa, the Nazis' mass killing.
Let's go back to that real quick. Oops. So prejudice is an attitude, where discrimination is a behavior. So I want you guys to understand those two concepts. That when you're prejudiced, when you're being prejudiced, you're showing an attitude. But when you're discriminating, you're presenting it a behavior. Okay. So I'm going to stop it right there, and we'll continue watching this video in my next video, and we will wrap up what multiculturalism in America. So I will see you then.